For this episode, we recommend that you use headphones to fully immerse yourself in this global conversation linking Silicon Valley, Stuttgart, Amsterdam, and Singapore as we bring you the world's first 8D podcast. Our topic is on tech innovations versus crisis management. Hello, hope you're safe and well. Welcome to Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers. I'm Chloe Cho. As we wade through lockdowns and shutdowns, we can't help but wonder whether we're living through a defining moment in history.
I would say this is meaningfully worse than the financial crisis and the dot-com crisis kind of put together. So if it weren't for the actions of the government, this would lead to a stock market rout of unprecedented proportions.
It's kind of an irony when you think about it. It's so tiny, we can't even see it. And yet we have no power in our human hands to deal with this virus. Not really. I mean, we're all under lockdown, no flights.
40% of Americans are $400 away from any kind of emergency expense driving them over the cliff. So what happens now when millions of people are out of their jobs, don't have broader healthcare or income or anything else, combined with that tension of automation? I think it is a potentially explosive combination.
If people feel that the devices that they use to engage with this world are purely tracking devices and tracing them, giving them all kinds of health IDs and health status of which they have no control. And actual leadership has to look at post-corona situations and build a very, very carefully designed privacy by design backbone for this situation.
From anti-lockdown rallies to an emotional send-off for a U.S. Navy captain who was sacked after being accused of going against the chain of command for demanding urgent action against a virus spreading aboard the U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt. These are extraordinary times. Is it a black swan event or a canary in the coal mine? Here's Jessica Groopman, automation specialist, founding partner of Kaleido Insights in Silicon Valley.
This was inherently a black swan event in that the probability of this was so low it was hardly even accounted for. Yet clearly the impact is profound and incredibly high, and that's sort of the parameter of a black swan event. But this is actually in some ways just another canary in the coal mine, and as it were, of a challenge that defies traditional boundaries, traditional national boundaries, traditional geographic boundaries. It's certainly no one corporation or country or individual or leader. No individual can fix this. There are so many examples of kind of these challenges that know no boundaries or jurisdiction and really impact us all, and as a result require really kind of unprecedented level of multilateral collaboration and coordination. So it's both, perhaps. It's both a black swan event that we could have hardly ever foreseen, but also just another example of some of the limitations and vulnerabilities in our current systems and traditional modes of governance and decision-making.
As the gravity of the situation sinks in, many can only ask why the world was so unprepared for a lethal pandemic that's infected 3 million and counting, and taken the lives of some 200,000 worldwide. Whether a black swan or a canary in the coal mine, was the virus attack unforeseen?
It's been a risk for decades, but it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. People warn about these things, and when they don't turn into pandemics, people get a false sense of security. The point is, you prepare once or twice and nothing happens, or at least something happens, but it doesn't spread all over the world because of government actions which are able to kind of contain it, and people get a false sense of security. I think that's the problem. To some extent, out of sight, out of mind, it was far away. But beyond that, I suspect that many governments in the West realized that even if they took every step possible to try to keep the virus out, it was hopeless. Once you had flights going out of Wuhan and the rest of China, it was going to spread around the world. And so the U.S. did try to block certain flights from China, but you can't block flights from every country on Earth unless you want to just halt the economy altogether. Even now, some flights are still happening between countries. To keep it out of a country entirely, you'd have to stop all flights and close all border crossings indefinitely for 1 to 2 to 3 years.
That's David Williams, founder and CEO of Williams Capital Advisors, a venture capitalist speaking from Palo Alto, California. As David notes, a virus attack was something that was foreseen, especially among intelligence and security officials with great foresight. Here's the account of what happened at the Global Futures Forum, an annual strategic foresight conference in 2012.
I was invited in 2012 to Rome. It was an invitation by the GFF, by the public arm of the CIA, and it was 150 intelligence and police professionals in Rome. And they were discussing 5 major threat scenarios. One was kind of military. The other 2 were do-it-yourself biology. So the virus was very much at the forefront of these intelligence professionals. And the other 2 were the total breakdown of society because of the inability of the state to deal with the digital. It was very interesting to hear these scenarios being played back by the intelligence community. Well, have their governments listened to them? I don't think so. So it's very clear that we should not look to governments for finding solutions here. We should look deeply, deeply into our own behavior, and we should find new ways of organizing in the technical tools that are now out there.
Speaking from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Rob van Kranenburg, the founder of the Internet of Things Council, says coronavirus could have been contained only if governments had taken action.
I was totally amazed and blown out of the water by the cleverness, of course, of these people and their assessment of these threats. Out of the 5 major threat scenarios that they came up with 8 years ago, basically 4 are sort of happening in the sense that it was clear to everyone before this crisis that the state as an entity was totally incapable of steering digital. Hence the crazy notions of politics and the strange reactions of these people like Johnson and Trump that have no clue, are totally not driven by any type of data governance, and that managed to take so much time and say all these things and confuse people. So people are really seeing that this model is quite gone. These people have no real insights into what's happening and actually making the situation worse.
Was the threat scenario a piece of intelligence privy to a select group of spy agencies? Take a listen to Bill Gates at a TED Talk in 2015, courtesy of TED Talks.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
5 years on since that prescient warning, countries around the world are scrambling to test the public and racing against the clock to produce a vaccine. In a high-tech era driven by AI, robotics, and data science, why haven't innovative solutions come to our rescue?
If you see Bill Gates' comments and the comments of many, many other leaders that have looked into this situation for many years, specialists, they've seen it coming and we are really not prepared. But on the other hand, when you look at HIV, for example, that's also a virus, there's no vaccine. People are so confidently saying we will have a vaccine in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months. To me, excuse me, but that's complete bollocks. There is absolutely no guarantee that we will ever have a vaccine against this particular virus, who since the breakout in Wuhan has now changed its varieties to 9 different strands. So how can we dare as humans to say we will have a vaccine in 12 months when everything we know about viruses, and I'm just taking HIV as an example, and this particular one who has morphed now so many times, we should not be so arrogant to underestimate this virus.
Joining from Stuttgart, Germany, Toby Ruckert, the founder and CEO of UIB, a conversational IoT platform, says, as much as there's been lack of preparation on the part of governments, corporations and international organizations have also been slow to embrace new technologies in crisis management and communications until now. The World Health Organization recently launched a health alert service via WhatsApp in multiple languages to provide accurate information about coronavirus. It's a powerful tool given WhatsApp's 2 billion users worldwide, and this is just scratching the surface in terms of what conversational IoT and AI can do today.
Just take a chatbot, a very simple chatbot on WhatsApp, where you can WhatsApp the hospital and make an appointment to get checked for COVID-19. Yeah, And then your test results are being WhatsApped back to you. Instead of you going there, standing in a queue, and then waiting for someone to call you back. I mean, in my own family, one member was tested and it took 10 days to get a result. And the result was not given. We had to call up the health department multiple times, and initially they didn't find the test. Long story short, this is all because there was not enough investment made in the infrastructure. WhatsApp has now launched with the World Health Organization because so many people have the same ever-recurring questions. What are the symptoms? Where can I get help? And so on. All these could be a central repository which can be delivered in the form of answers on any of the messaging channels, be it WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, etc. Could be a robot if people are actually going to a hospital. The robot could literally talk to them because people are there to save lives, and the standard questions and queries, you could go through a quick process. In supermarkets now, in certain areas, they only let a number of people in. So we've integrated with security cameras, and you can actually check before you go to a particular supermarket, what's the waiting time. So the camera will see, okay, there are about 10 people waiting outside, 50 went inside, average time inside is 15 minutes, 20 came out. People can simply WhatsApp and they can say, what's the waiting time at my favorite supermarket XYZ? And then it says 10 minutes or 2 hours. And if it's 2 hours, why you want to go now?
Were you surprised when the World Health Organization decided to use a chat function, a WhatsApp messaging system, to reach out to the world?
Not at all. I mean, information has to go where people are because people find it very hard to go where information is. I got some WhatsApp messages from friends while I'm in Singapore saying, don't go there because there was someone with coronavirus. The Singapore government did something very brilliant. They partnered with WhatsApp and they said, look, we got to inform each and everyone who wants to get proper information from us as their government that they have elected to help them basically have a certain clarity and transparency on what is really true and what is not.
That's the sound of a robot deployed at Guangdong Provincial People's Hospital in China during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic to deliver medicines to coronavirus patients. The robot can open and close doors, take elevators on its own, handle the delivery load of 3 people, and most importantly, it's been credited with minimizing the infection risk among hospital staff.
올바른 손씻기는 30초 이상 기능으로 꼼꼼하게 씻어주세요.
Over in Seoul, South Korea, robots were deployed to conduct temperature checks, transport and dispose of used clothing and other materials worn by patients and hospital staff, and robots were sterilizing negative pressure rooms for COVID-19 patients in just 30 seconds by absorbing oxygen and emitting eco-friendly ultraviolet and LED light without using harsh chemicals. These innovative solutions help the country suppress the virus with much success. South Korea had a death rate of 4 per million versus 330 deaths per million in Italy in early April, according to joint analysis by Google and Deutsche Bank Global Research. Yet, for the vast majority of the world that is reeling from shutdowns and lockdowns, these solutions seem too localized and lacking in scale. Why can't technology come to the rescue when we are in this hyper-connected, AI-driven world?
It's such an excellent point, and it's true that some actually did see this, and there have been many examples of folks sort of sounding the sirens, but no one really caring. Much of the design and the emphasis and the investment when it comes to technology has been around explicit knowledge. It has been around codifying big data sets, quantifying, tagging, everything in the world that can be essentially digitized. That's been the effort, from Internet of Things to augmented reality to transactions and fintech. All of these things are quantifiable, finite and discrete entities that we are bringing online. What that doesn't account for, though, is the other side of the coin, the tacit knowledge, the experience, the connecting of the dots across large ontologies or large knowledge sets, the kind of experience that comes with lots of time and expertise and training, something that you can't just learn or encode from a discrete set of variables or a textbook. So I think that's part of it, is that when we think about technology today, there's actually a huge gap in how we express and incorporate and integrate human knowledge and sort of good judgment. I would be remiss to say that tech is a solution in and of itself. It's not. It is a tool. And so much depends on how we design its use, what the intention is behind the design of technology. And that goes for any kind of technology. Certainly when it comes to our on-demand services and kind of this micro-fulfillment or last-mile deliveries, this has really been catalyzed by this event beyond urban centers, of course. Work-from-home technologies, Zoom technologies, burgeoning industries around telehealth, robotics is another, ed tech, education technology.
Well, the most important ones are in healthcare in terms of the antibody testing and actual COVID testing. So you're seeing lots of efforts here among startups to get approval or expedited approval for those tests. So that's the main thing going on. But you're also seeing some things, connected thermometer company that actually can pull in the data from thermometers all over the country and can tell when fevers on average are going down in a given city or nationwide. And that can give you an early sign as to whether or not you have outbreaks in an area, and if so, whether they're being contained. So you're seeing a lot of tech very much focused on the virus itself, because you can't really fix the economy until you've got the virus under control.
As global tech giants, Google and Apple set aside their rivalry to develop a contact tracing app for release as early as in May, the ramifications could be huge, given that iPhones and devices running on Google's Android operating system account for the vast majority of some 3.5 billion smartphones in active use today.
It is kind of surprising just how kind of flat-footed we were in this. Part of the problem is it just takes time. It's going to take many months to develop the solutions to the contact tracing like we've talked about with Apple and Google. We're already working on that now.
Contact tracing means that COVID-19 will give governments the legitimacy to conduct mass surveillance, which Rob van Kranenburg says reminds him of the nightmarish vision portrayed by French philosopher Michel Foucault, who delved into how societies historically exercised surveillance and control to deal with two kinds of threats to public health, namely lepers and plagues.
The difference between the leper and the plague. And so for the leper, there was banishment, and for the plague, there was control. So Foucault is talking about what happened during the plague, which is like hundreds of years ago. Everything was locked down into grids, and there were districts and there were houses. And the very interesting thing is that, first of all, everybody was registered. Everybody had a name, and every morning, the overseers went past the houses, and each citizen was awarded their own window. So if you were not at the window, you're probably in bed. You were a menace. That this situation is kind of a default situation that we've had by this kind of society that seemed so agile, fluid, and in flux, actually manages to grind to a halt extremely fast. There's very little resistance. We've already built the potential for this. The big difference then is that you would present yourself for that window, but now we're representing ourselves through windows, which is basically in our apps, which is a smartphone. But we have no further control what happens between all the way that we are seen or represented in these apps. As this AI layer is happening and as the analytics is there and as we're so extremely predictable as people, if you look at my shopping list for 2 weeks, you probably know what I'm going to buy for the next 15 years. So our predictability, together with that immense computing power on the proactive capabilities of where we're going to go, is something that needs to be under public control. It needs to be under some kind of democratic control. If it's purely in the hands of a government, that government cannot help to become obsessive compulsive with it. So this should be held in check. On the other hand, also for the commercial companies, this is also quite problematic. The dynamic pricing that they are doing on basically awarding us a price in a different time of the day, or because with any new thing that we buy, we may get different prices for others. We don't know what's playing in the background. And this also needs to be held in check. So at the moment, this immense potential to actually bring balance to a world and to build decision makings on top of real-time data streams. There's one particular group missing at the moment, and that's us. That's the citizens. And so we should be basically kickstarting ourselves into a new position of power, and where we're proposing the notion of disposable identities. And this notion of disposable identities is gaining traction. And that's what I've been working on for the past 3 years.
Personal autonomy and privacy, these things have pretty much been thrown out the door for the better good of the broader public, especially since much of the world is in lockdown. People are getting scared. There's a lot of panic. Maybe the more pertinent thing might be, how do we find a vaccine? How do we find a cure? How do we find where the virus is? And yet, why are you proposing this autonomy given the crisis that we're in?
There probably is going to be another virus in the next weeks, or maybe next month or next year. And that's why it's extremely important to not now do things like we see happening across the world, and also like in Spain, or states of emergencies where all these things go out. If people only will start to see these digital tools and their smartphone as a tracking device, they will probably have 2 or 3 and leave some at home and go and find other ways of communicating. So we will not build a citizen buy-in for DLT, for ledger technologies, for blockchains, for AI, for IoT, for a fully connected world. The actual leadership has to look at post-corona situations and build a very, very carefully designed privacy by design backbone for this situation.
This project to anonymize data, do you think this crisis, this pandemic will change that perception? Because until now, it was more about how do I protect my privacy? But when you're up against the issue of greater good, the well-being of the broader public, do you think that argument will be thrown out the door?
Well, the true believers on both sides aren't going to change their positions. Those who think privacy is the most important factor aren't going to change that stance. And those who think that there's public good from contact tracing, for example, they're not going to change their views. I think, though, what we're going to see maybe is if many months go by and the US and Europe still have an ongoing problem with new infections and with the ability to trace where those infections came from and who those people were in contact with. And if at the same time China sees a lower and lower number of new cases per day, you're going to start to see a very stark comparison in terms of China's lower protections on individual privacy being outweighed by their ability to keep the virus under control. And that may sway some minds in the middle.
For those for and against contact tracing, take note that nearly 2 billion mobile phones, used mostly by those in the lower income bracket or senior citizens who are more vulnerable to the virus, will fall through the cracks due to incompatibility with the latest Bluetooth technology needed for contact tracing. Do you think that the pendulum will shift? Because right now we're talking about the welfare, the well-being of a broader public against, it's my privacy, your privacy. Do you think that debate will shift?
Certainly it's already shifting. The trade-off is between convenience for privacy. And we're not really talking about convenience now. We're talking about public health and economic viability, and essentially the resilience of the economy. So already that understanding, the shared sense of what is the trade-off for sharing my data and what data is shifting. On the cultural side, there is a strong sense of sort of keep the government away or keep any large entity away. And that has all kinds of different manifestations, but it's absolutely relevant here as we have seen protests against shutdowns in the United States. It's sort of the same vein of rugged individualism, if you like. On the legal side, there have been to the tune of dozens and dozens of bills in Congress around data privacy and how to regulate that, but only a handful when it comes to biometrics and health data. I think we are in a major reevaluation period for what data privacy means and potentially how it's legislated and regulated here.
How far people will go to ease or uphold data privacy remains to be seen, but as shell-shocked economies and businesses seek to pandemic-proof their operations, robotics, AI, and automation are set to witness a surge in deployment worldwide, which will likely spell millions of job losses at a time when work prospects are dismal in a recession or a downright depression. Pandemics have shaped civilization throughout history, from the Black Death in the 1300s to the H1N1 flu of 2009. Pandemics have strengthened the hand of the surviving workers. Will it be the case with coronavirus?
this could very well be tied to a backlash not just against automation, but against sort of corporatism, perhaps elitism generally. This is a current that already is clearly, as you said, well and alive in the United States and may well be conflated around sort of technology elitism, whether that is large corporations deciding and collecting your data or whether that is displacing jobs as a result of AI and automation.
I think you see streamlined industries, but more importantly, you see much lower demand for probably years to come. I mean, think about travel. It's hard to imagine the level of travel that people used to do happening in the next year or two, or even 3. It's going to take time for people's comfort with traveling to come back, especially people over the age of 65, to the extent they're not immune to the virus. And then beyond that, people's pocketbooks have been hurt, and they'll probably continue to get hurt. And so some people aren't going to be comfortable traveling just from a financial perspective. So we're talking about years worth of disruptions and kind of a smaller industries all over the globe.
This is a forced situation. Innovation will happen, and we will come out perhaps on top. But it totally depends on us as humans how we deal with this situation. Politically and the society consequences, just look at India. What's going on there? There's an exodus of millions and millions of people who walk home for 2 weeks, hundreds of kilometers, entire families, because they can't pay the rent in the big cities, because they're not getting work there anymore.
There was a lot of talk about the super empowered individual. And there was, of course, the Assanges and the Snowdens of this world. And now all of a sudden, the biggest kind of threat is the individual. It's what they call a super empowered individual.
What will the post-coronavirus world spell? One of tension and strife? If so, who wields power? Or will the crisis bring about positive change towards sustainability? Part 2 of our global conversation linking Europe, Asia, and North America continues next week with Jessica Groopman of Kaleido Insights, David Williams of Williams Capital Advisors, Rob van Kranenburg of the IoT Council, and Toby Ruckert of UIB. And I'm Chloe Cho. Take care and stay safe. We'll be back here next week on Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers.